With loads of business advice flooding the industry, it has never been harder to see the path to success. And you can't take action if you don't have clarity. Get clear on the actionable tips and strategies that will help to scale your business here on Masters in Clarity, the podcast that brings you clarity around messaging, business growth, digital marketing, personal development, and the business owner's journey to success. Let's join our guide, the master of turning clarity into action and lasting impact, Dolores Hirschmann.
I am so excited to bring you this next guest for our podcast. Linda Rosetti is an expert on individual and organizational transformation. Our renting uphill in her mid-40s sparked her curiosity about those times when we call into question who we are and how we make meaning in our lives. That experience inspired her to expand on a decades-long business career by pursuing research, writing, and advocacy focused on how adults step into the fullness of who we are and our truth. You don't want to miss Linda's interview because she talks about that moment where everything in your life seems perfect to the outside eye, but internally you're in a moment where you cannot find your footing. So how do you navigate that? How do you move from a place of internal disruption without breaking everything out in your outside world? So join us for this conversation with Linda. Linda, so good to see you. We met 4 years ago. Before the pandemic, we were in a panel together at the Women's Conference, South Shore Women Conference, correct?
That's right. It was such a joy to be on the panel with you. I'm so happy to have the chance to talk again.
And I remember my daughter was with me and we connected. So I'm excited to start this conversation and just bring to our listeners this very specific nuance that you have focused most of your career on right now that is so relevant right now. So let's start at the top, at the beginning. How did we get here? How did you get to do the work you are doing? What has been your clarity journey? Which I know there's a lot of confusion in clarity, but
so I'm totally fascinated by how we respond to major upheaval in our lives, right? That's the thing that has just grabbed my curiosity for now more than a decade. And the reason why I got there was really twofold, right? One is I, in the mid-40s, arrived at this moment where I felt as if the ground fell out from underneath me. I was in this free fall. And from the outside, everyone was said, oh my gosh, look at that life, right? I was an executive in a global Fortune 500, number 5 person in a 21,000 person organization, right? I had use of the corporate jet. My kids and I, we flew to DC, for the weekend because, so it was
good
life, right? It was all good. And yet I was struck by this feeling like something wasn't right. And it was radical. It wasn't like, oh, I had a bad day. It was, I was in this increasing mode of not being able to function. Like I remember one day I borrowed a car, and I say that in a very cautious way because we parked our cars underneath the building and we took like 3 or 4 in a row because the place was teeny. You had to leave your keys in the car. And honest to God, I left the garage in the wrong car because I was in such a state, like I was not functioning. So when I say the ground fell out from underneath me, I had this life, but something was wrong and I had no name for it. And so then the second reason is everyone I tried to talk to about this was like, oh, just, get over it, go get some help, self-care, like move on, buckle up. And like nobody wanted to honor the fact that I was in a space that was really critical and scary. And I think as much as I was feeling kind of unmoored, I was also fascinated by the reaction of everyone around me. And I was like, whoa. And so at the time, I ran HR and administration for this large Fortune 500 company. And a colleague of mine ran an outplacement firm. And I was like, I really want to talk to people who are in transition because I'm fascinated by this. He's like, let us be your learning lab, whatever you need. And so that started a series of conversations that now I refer to as my research, that has almost 300 people in it, that, I've spent hours and hours talking to people who were in similar situations to my own, right? Their life circumstances were very different, but all of a sudden they found themselves in this moment of upheaval that they had no name for. And yet they found it difficult to kind of function, to make their way. And I think there's a zillion reasons why we get to those moments, but as a society, we kind of, we're socialized to run the other way, to not, give them oxygen or explore what they are, but to like tamp them down, ignore, run the other way, buckle our shoes up, keep going. And my work has all been about trying to understand what happens at those moments and give us a different way to respond.
So let's bring this way down, because our listeners are listening to you and they can relate. Transition, it's a big, moment. What does it actually look like for you? That day you took the wrong car and you were feeling what you were feeling. And as you say, it wasn't a day, it was like a moment where everything stopped and you couldn't do one more step. What happened next? Like, tell us the story. And then how did that kind of translate into relating your moments, your tiny moments, into your 300 research tiny moments of other people?
Yeah, no, my first reaction to that is, what's wrong with me? Like, what's wrong with me, in a very serious way? Like, I thought I had some mental functioning problem, like there was something seriously wrong. And that's a very scary thing when you're working 50 hours a week, you have 2 small kids, we're running lives. And so, it was a time when I drew very close inward. Like, I withdrew, I resigned from a lot of community work I did. Like I said, oh my God, I gotta reduce stress in my life. And what that ultimately did, I can see in hindsight, is that isolated me even more. Like, it was the exact wrong thing to do, right? Because I pulled away. And so, I ultimately left that job. I resigned the job and, thinking that the job was the problem, right? So what's wrong with me? The first thing I do is I start shedding things, commitments that I had. And then I was like, well, I better get rid of this job. And that was a very terrifying thing. Economically, it had implications for my family. Socially, all the people I work with are like, what are you doing? And then, when I was kind of looking for what's next, they're like, well, you're not here anymore. So it's as if you don't exist. So I say that to say that it is terrifying to kind of go into this kind of zone that is a bit of a void. But I was so curious about it. And I knew that I couldn't have been the first person to experience this. And, I had spent 30 years by that time in the business world. And I was like, you know what? I know how to solve amorphous problems. I know how to figure this out. And so I started to figure it out. And I took one step and another step and another step. And Dolores, I wish I could tell you it was like some fancy moment. And here's the moment it all made sense. It didn't. I took a step and I kept taking another step.
So, and I'm curious about going this way in this conversation, but let's stay here, because you took the actions you felt were the right actions. Some might have been exactly what they needed to be. Some might have been intuitively the right one, but not what you needed, like drawing away from people, drawing away from organizations. And I can definitely relate to that. I mean, we were just chatting before our interview, and the last 9 months I was sharing that it's been hard, and I turned 50 in July. And I'll tell you this because I think it relates. I had been in such a state of physical pain and like mental shutdown and burnout that I didn't want to celebrate my birthday, which I love celebrating. And 50 is 50. And it wasn't that until my aunt from Argentina said, I am coming. Like, I don't care what you do, I am coming. And my best friend said, I am coming. And a cousin has like 3 women in my life who my best friend, my aunt, and a cousin I hadn't seen in 20 years. They came and they set the table. They cut the fruit. They hosted my neighbors who came. And I was celebrated that I realized that I didn't want to celebrate and I didn't want to invite anybody, and they didn't listen. And I am so grateful they didn't listen, because that was what I needed. I needed for once, because I think what you're talking about and what I experienced, and I'm trying to serve this conversation, is that I didn't want to be seen broken. That's why I shy away. It wasn't because I didn't need the help. I did, but I didn't want to have other people know that I needed help, nor did I want to be experienced in a place of weakness.
Yeah, well, that's that's very self-aware. And first of all, happy birthday.
Thank you.
That's a lovely milestone, right? I from talking with people right now, I've spent a decade talking with people who had moments just like you described. And I've learned that there are two different things that occur in life that we don't put a lot of brain time on. And there are two words, change and transition, and they mean very different things, even though we use them interchangeably, right? Changes are used to reach a goal, right? They're a known outcome. They're a variation, an alteration. When we say, okay, I'm a marketing expert and I have my own company, but now I'm going to go join Google. I'm making an alteration.
A job change.
Yeah, a job, right?
It's a house change, job change. I got married.
You get it. Get married, remarried, divorce. Divorce is a little different, but all good. But change, we know the outcome. Transitions occur when there's a shift in what holds value and meaning to us. And very often, they occur when we're not really sure what's happening, but we have this sense, like you talked about, I have this sense there's something wrong. I drew in, and this notion that transitions are misunderstood. We think that they are the same as change. They're actually very different, and how we respond to them needs to be different. And the beauty is that transitions are actually this invitation for growth. And when I say growth, it is this opportunity to come into our voice in a larger way. And when I use the word voice, it isn't audible. You hear me speaking. It's our truth. And what's happening when we have these emotional, right? We have these emotional reactions. You kind of drew inward from the physical pain you were experiencing. I drew inward because I couldn't make sense of the environment I was in anymore. Usually what happens is our emotions mobilize to keep us safe. And what happens is they staple our feet to the ground, when in fact, we really need to keep going. And so we respond to the emotion, and oftentimes we can respond in almost the counterintuitive way, like 180.
What you don't need, yeah.
Right. And so, this beautiful moment that your friends helped you kind of on ramp to celebrate your birthday is so powerful, because what they were doing is they were creating an environment for you to be and to get closer to who you are. And that's the thing that I think has been most inspirational about the work that I've done, is that people have all these ideas that transition is leaving something. Okay, I leave a job, I leave a geography, I leave a marriage, or, I go into a new relationship. That's the transition. And while society teaches us that that's true, what I've learned is transition is this process of coming into our voice. And we'll never do it with change alone, right? We have to constantly evaluate who we are and how we make meaning in the world. And it's through that process that our voices strengthen. And that's what transition is. And I submit to you that sometimes, we get there through pain. But I now read, after my research, that pain is very real, but it also can be a signal to say there's something more. And it's a beautiful time to reach for that.
So much to unpack in this. And, I want to just put this in the context of what you stand for. And one of the things that you've talked about, and I'm trying to find the right wording here, but is this place of advocacy in the study and the support and the resources of helping adults step into the fullness of who they are, their truth, right? That is, I want to bring that forth, because why are we talking about all this? Why are we studying, or why are you, Linda, studying transition versus change and doing the work you're doing? I know you have a second book coming up. You have a very successful first book, but because this is all the ingredients in the recipe of creating the space or the guidance or the resources for adults, for I'm an adult as well, so just I don't forget that, of we becoming into our fullness expression of ourselves, our truth.
Yes.
I love you talk about change and transition, and the way I'm interpreting your way of explaining this is change is mostly engaging your head. It's like, I need to do this, I'm gonna go there, and you gave a very specific characteristic, which is change is you are very clear you're going from point A to point B. Almost change could be a drive, like you know where you're gonna end. Maybe you don't know how exactly you're going to feel. That's, but you know exactly where you're going to end. Transition, and why it's so scary, is that obviously something is changing. You could use that word change, but it involves the head and the heart, and the head has no footing in which to lead from, because there's so much turmoil, there's so much stirring in the soul or in the heart.
Yes, we decouple from so much that's familiar when we transition, right? And that's unknown, right? Like our bodies react to that instability in lots of ways, right? Physiologically, we can, so many people in my research have had pain in lots of parts of their body, be it back pain, headaches, what have you, right? We respond to it energetically, right? Some people get amped up, some people get lethargic, right? We respond to it emotionally, right? So this notion when we lean towards transition, while it's this enormous invitation, we respond with our hearts and our emotive, our energy systems in ways that can be really confusing, and it can throw us off the track of really advancing to where we have the possibility to go. And I think that's the reason why I do this work. There's something about it that really captures my heart, because it is this need for context. That's all it is. I feel as if I'm an educator more than anything else, where it's like, if I can give you the understanding of what change and transition is, the next time you are smacked, by something unexpected, you can say, wait a minute, you have the context to experience that upheaval in a new way. And if that happens, I declare victory, right? Because there's, we have this enormous capacity as individuals. And so often, whether it's because of our gender or our intelligence or our ethnicity or our geography, whatever it is, we get these messages like, no, don't reach for that. You need to be lesser. And that makes me crazy, because everyone has this enormous capacity, and there's so much capacity left untapped. And so I do this work because I'm like, hey, if I give people the tools to understand what's really happening at a moment of upheaval, they're going to reach forward. And that's what we all need to do. We need to constantly, at moments of uncertainty, instead of pulling back, we need to go forward. And we can, because we have so much. There's so much that we have. Every one of us, every person listening has so much that's untapped. And it isn't just for the few, the proud, the genius entrepreneur who's a billionaire. It isn't.
It's for all of us.
Everyone. And so my work is really, I went to school as a young kid, 12 years with the Sisters of St. Joseph's, right? They were, a nun or an order of nuns, that taught school in the US in the 60s and the 70s. And they always said, a life well lived is a life in service to others. And I think that baked into my brain at some point. And really, my work is really that. It's in service to this notion of believe in yourself. Go find that voice. Find your voice. And it doesn't come like one swing of the bat, like, oh, here, I'm here. It's risking a little bit today and a little bit more tomorrow, and that much more the next day.
For me, it's been at every decade, like literally every decade. I go through a transition. Now I'm recognizing it, and it's interesting. And I'll keep bringing my experience the last 9 months because I think it helps illustrate. Because as you're talking, I'm recognizing that I am in transition, and that the last 9 months of pain, or 8 months before, I mean, the last month has been really good, but that. And for those listening, it's like, how do you understand, how do you realize that you are in transition? Is because something falls way off. For you, Linda, it's like there was a feeling that something was really wrong mentally. Like there was, maybe some scientists will say, well, that was burnout, or maybe that was, you can put labels to it. Doesn't matter. For me, I took my back pain. I was like, oh, I hurt my back. And then I started going in. I bought a book saying heal your back, and who said, like, look at your psychology around it. I got into therapy to talk about, okay, what does the back pain mean? I mean, there's a reality. I have 3 herniated discs. That shows in the MRI. I'm not discussing that. But what about me bring this in today? Because the timing matters, and the timing gives you information.
And so I have to say, it's so interesting, that example that you raise. And what I often say to people is there's ways to start that are really easy, right? That are easy to kind of bring our awareness to what's happening. And one of the first ways is to think about the expectations that we carry. Because what happens when we grow as adults, right? Most of us, we enter adulthood, right? We use what is external to us to form our definition and expectation for who we are, right? So we use, the communities that we live in, the schools we attend, our families, our religious affiliation. There's a zillion things that kind of we look to as reference points, and that's how we form kind of who we are, right? That's the identity we create. We nourish it from those external places. When we go through transition, what we're doing is we're moving to a new place where we rely on different inputs to define our expectation and definition for who we are, right? We don't like throw the baby out with the bathwater, but we turn up the volume on those things that hold value and meaning to us. And what that often means is that we have to occupy our identity like in a different way, right? We might still have a faith or a connection to a community that's the same, but we might not lead with that, or we're different in how we occupy that, because we're more rooted in our own kind of our genuine voice, what is of value and meaning to us. And the easiest way to begin to recognize whether that kind of a shift is happening is to ask ourselves, what expectations do we carry for ourselves? I talk to all these, particularly young women. They're like, oh, I'm going to be a GM by the time I'm 40. I'm like, okay, that's excellent. That sounds like a really good goal. And I'm like, well, where does that come from? Like, why that? And it's as simple as that. Is like asking yourself, well, okay, well, yeah, this is an expectation is I want to be a good parent, or I want to be a good neighbor, whatever it is. It doesn't matter what it is, right? Just bringing our awareness to what it is we carry, like what we're setting our own expectations on, is an excellent exercise, because in that we can go down the list once we create it and say, that one's kind of in flux, or that one doesn't.
That one's not really mine.
That's right. I got that from, my first boss, who I stopped working for 20 years ago. Right. And it's interesting because that can help honor, like dignify what is expressing itself in our lives. So that's simple exercise, like very simple, to say, you know what, hey, wow, look at that. And I guess now, if that isn't something that I either believe in or think it's current, what am I leaving space for? And it's a really lovely, simple way to begin.
I love that. And I'm gonna break it down. I know we I want to make sure that we honor time, but I want to break it down and stop me if I'm off track. But I think it's just such an important, especially for young people transitioning from high school to college, from college to the world, like that senior year. I mean, I now have 3 children. Well, one that done the senior from college through life, one that is going through it, and another one just did it through high school. And everybody experiences it differently, but there's a couple of elements here. Is that first of all, first step is that giving space to whatever you're feeling, because we all of us push through until either we have mental breakdown or mental crying. It doesn't have to be a breakdown, or back pain or hives or feel like it will show up somehow in your physical being. And so first is, okay, if you're off, give it space. Second is, what is in my backpack? I love that you said we are carrying expectations. We're carrying, like, put it down on paper. What is it that I'm carrying? I mean, I was talking to my daughter and she was saying, well, I need to be X by the time I'm 23. And I'm like, where did that come from? Like, really? Like, sure, I'm happy for you, but is that something you're carrying, or is that something you're embracing?
Right. And it's so, go ahead, let me finish, because I haven't.
And there's a difference.
There is a difference. And I find I've talked to people who are 20 and 70 in my work, right? And every age in between. And I find some of the heaviest burden are those in their late 20s who went to college and got out and tried something and realize at the end of their 20s that they don't really like it. And they almost cannot discharge that experience from a sense of failure. Oh, I failed. When in fact, it's nothing of the sort, right? What it is moving to this place of self-definition earlier than maybe the rest of the population, right? Now, there are some people who go through life and make thousands of changes and never transition.
How can you go through change and not transition? And my interpretation of what you're saying is that because you never give the space and have the courage to unpack your backpack, to remove other people's identity. You have incorporated expectations and shoulds that you don't give yourself the time and the permission, because I think permission is a big word here, of saying, I choose to move forward with this expectation, and I choose to let go and send that back to my boss of 20 years. Yes. And thank you, but not thank you. Like, thank you, but it's no longer serving me. Thank you, but I no longer choose it. And that discernment, I think, is where you shift, where you make a change, a transition.
Yes. And I think, to be fair, we get really mixed signals from society, right? So a lot of people don't know the difference, right? And so they think they're doing the right thing. And the right thing is to buckle down, going. And so again, I think that a lot of what I thank you for having me join you here is help me educate, right? Because once we know the difference, we can bring that different energy to our experience of upheaval, whether it's a crummy boss or an apartment that doesn't make any sense or whatever. And if we have the tools in those moments to make different choices, we can change the trajectory of our lives.
And I love that. And I want to add here, because with the right tools, which I understand you didn't have at your moment of transition, we could make that transition for the highest good of all of us. I mean, I can see that, again, back to my personal experience, I know that I'm in transition. So my thinking is not how do I get out of all the commitments I have right now? That's not where I'm going right now. I'm going with like, okay, let me get really clear of where am I going? Where do I want to go? And then let that inform how I transition beyond whatever commitments I have right now or not. But I mean, we're in the Masters in Clarity podcast, clarity and awareness and leaning into the experience of transition can bring forth an amazing, beautiful process and avoid so much pain that, the 300 or more people you've talked to had in many ways, without a roadmap, without resources, transition will bring a lot of pain, and it doesn't necessarily have to.
Absolutely. These moments of upheaval in our lives are incredible invitations. They offer irreplaceable goodness to everyone.
I love that.
And it doesn't take, right? It doesn't take, you don't have to leave your current experience to participate. A lot of people are like, I got to pay the mortgage off. I got to send the kids to college. You can make those shifts right where you sit, right? It's a lot inside. It's an awareness. It's a different way you greet today. It isn't a departure. And I think that it's a wonderful place to begin, which is to center on who we are and how we make meaning in our world and give space for that. And don't think that that's wrong or offbeat or the different course. It's honoring that and continuing to foster it.
I love that. Well, so thank you for your time, and I want to honor that. First is, where can we find more about you?
Yes, easy, right? So you can just go to lindarosetti.com, and I have a terribly difficult last name, right? Linda is Linda, and my last name Rosetti is 2 S's and 2 T's. So it's ROSSETTI.com. And right there you can find links to my podcast. I write a blog. I've had a ton of speaking engagements. So there's video vignettes there. There's a lot of resources. And I also offer a free weekly drop-in session for those who are in transition. And you can find that. It's called Dishing on Disruption. And the information on that is right on my website in the speaking area.
I love that. And all the information is under this video anyway, and in this pod. So Linda, I always want to leave our listeners with a clear action they can take today. So what is a clear action you would invite our listeners to take on?
I would ask each of you to take one step today that brings out your voice in a new way, whether that's in a conversation with a sibling, a family member, a workplace, with the dog, doesn't matter. One step to turn up the volume on your voice.
I love that. Well, thank you so much for joining us. It was, as always, a pleasure. And you heard it. Just wake up and look at where you are and understand exactly what is that next step to bring your voice forward.
Dolores, thank you for having me. I really appreciate it.
You're very welcome, Linda. Have you ever thought about the difference between change and transition? You don't want to miss this conversation I just had with Linda, where we really go deep into how do we recognize transition. She talks about how most of us go through life doing the changes that, life brings us forth, but we never embrace those changes enough or go deep enough to recognize them as an identity transition, as a moment of understanding who we are, what are we here to do, and what do we hold of value in our lives. And that difference can mean the biggest meaning and fulfillment for your personal life. So you don't want to miss my interview with Linda.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Masters in Clarity. If you loved today's show, please subscribe to our podcast and leave us a review. Share this episode with 2 people in your world, and as a gift, go to mastersinclarity.com/free to download free clarity resources. Join your host, Dolores Hirschmann, next time to continue forging a clear path to your impactful success.